Have you ever tried pasting a really long, complicated sentence or maybe a paragraph into an online translator,
Mhm.
and you notice halfway through it just kind of breaks?
Oh, yeah,
Like, the beginning makes sense, but then the end just turns into, well, nonsense.
absolutely. And that kind of failure, that was a huge problem for the early machine translation systems, the ones built with neural networks.
Right.
It really was a fundamental limitation. These networks, they struggled because they were trying to cram everything they learned from the source sentence,
Yeah.
all the meaning, the nuances, the word order, into just a single fixed-size digital thing, a vector.
Like trying to write a perfect one-sentence summary of War and Peace or something.
Exactly.
It's just not possible to capture all that detail.
No way.
And this is where the deep dive begins today. We're unpacking a really important paper that directly tackled this bottleneck, and, well, it completely changed how neural machine translation works.
Yeah, it's a cornerstone paper. It's called Neural Machine Translation by Jointly Learning to Align and Translate. Came out in 2014 by Bahdanau, Cho, and Bengio.
Okay, so our mission today is to dive into this research.
Hmm.
We want to understand why that single vector approach failed, explore the surprisingly elegant solution they came up with, a mechanism that's now, like, fundamental to modern AI,
It really is.
and see the dramatic proof from their experiments, especially how it finally cracked the code for translating those tricky long sentences.
Let's get into it.
Okay, let's see what they found.
So before this paper, the big idea for neural machine translation, NMT, it was pretty ambitious. The goal was to replace these complex, old-style statistical systems that had lots of separate parts.
Right, the pipeline approaches.
Exactly. Replace all that with one single large neural network. You feed it a source sentence and you just get a translation out the other end. Simple concept, hard execution.
And the standard way they tried to build this was with what's called an encoder-decoder structure, right?
That's the one. You had an encoder part, basically, that would read the source sentence word by word and process that whole sequence down into that one single fixed-length vector we mentioned.
The bottleneck.
The bottleneck, yeah. Then a decoder part would take just that single vector and try to generate the target sentence word by word. And the whole system, encoder and decoder, was trained together end to end to maximize the probability of getting the translation right.
But you mentioned that fixed-length vector was the issue. Why was it such a critical problem, especially when sentences got longer?
Well, the core issue, as the paper really digs into and shows, is information compression. If you try to force all the richness and detail of a long sentence into one fixed-size vector, you inevitably lose information. Things get dropped.
It's like trying to remember the entire plot of a long movie just by remembering one single key image from it.
That's a great analogy. The longer the movie, the harder that becomes, right? You just can't capture everything.
And did they have actual data showing this was the failure point?
Oh, yeah. They reference some earlier work, including stuff by Cho and Bengio themselves, which demonstrated pretty clearly that the performance of these basic encoder-decoder models dropped off, sometimes sharply, as the input sentence length went up.
So the longer the sentence, the worse the translation.
Pretty much. The model just couldn't seem to hold on to everything it needed from a long sentence in that single compressed state. It forgot things.
Okay, so the problem is clear. This single vector is like a memory bottleneck, especially for long sentences. How did Bahdanau, Cho, and Bengio propose to fix it? What was the big idea?
Their brilliant move, really, was to get rid of that single fixed-length bottleneck altogether. So instead of the encoder producing just one summary vector, it would process the source sentence into a sequence of vectors. They called them annotations in the paper. You can think of it as creating a richer representation for each word or each part of the source sentence, but one that's also aware of its neighbors.
So the decoder doesn't just get one summary anymore. It gets this whole sequence.
Exactly. And this is where the real magic happens. This is the core idea that we now universally call attention. When the decoder is generating a word in the target translation, it doesn't just look at some fixed context vector anymore.
Okay.
Instead, it dynamically looks back at all of those source annotation vectors from the encoder.
It looks at all of them. How does it know which ones are actually important for the specific word it's trying to translate right now?
Ah, that's the learning to align part of the paper's title. It learns. For each target word it's about to generate, the model computes a unique context vector.
Okay.
But this context vector isn't fixed. It's essentially a weighted average or weighted sum of all the source annotation vectors. And the key part is how it figures out those weights.
The weights. Like, how much attention to pay to each source word for this specific target word.
Precisely. That's exactly it. The paper introduces what they call an alignment model. It's basically another small neural network that's trained right alongside the main translation model.
Integrated.
Yeah, totally integrated. This alignment model looks at the current state of the decoder, like what words it has generated so far and what its internal memory looks like, and it scores how relevant each source annotation vector is for predicting the next target word.
I see.
Those scores then get turned into weights, probabilities basically, that determine how much influence each source annotation has on calculating that context vector for the current step.
Ah, okay. So the weights are effectively telling the model, hey, right now, to translate this particular word, you should focus most heavily on these specific words over in the source sentence.
You got it. That's exactly what the weights represent, a kind of soft alignment, or maybe think of it as a dynamic focus on the relevant parts of the source input. It's soft because it's not a hard one-to-one link, like saying source word 5 always maps to target word 7.
Right.
Instead, the model distributes its attention, its weight, across multiple source words, maybe focusing heavily on one or two, but still giving some weight to others. And these weights always sum up to 1.
This feels fundamentally different. It means the information isn't all crammed into one single point anymore. It's spread out across these annotations.
Exactly.
And the decoder can selectively pull the bits it needs when it needs them.
That's the core benefit. It completely frees the model from that fixed-length bottleneck. The information is distributed, and the decoder can intelligently retrieve what's relevant for each step of the translation process. And this, they hypothesized, would dramatically improve its ability to handle longer inputs.
Makes sense. And what kind of encoder did they use for this new architecture? Did that change too?
Yeah, they used a bidirectional RNN, or BRNN. A standard recurrent neural network reads a sequence just one way, start to finish. A BRNN reads it both forwards and backwards. So the annotation vector the encoder creates for any given source word ends up containing information not just about the words that came before it, but also about the words that come after it.
Ah, so it gives each source word's representation a richer, more complete context from the entire sentence.
Precisely. A more context-aware representation for each point in the sequence.
And crucially, this alignment model, the part that calculates the attention weights, it wasn't some separate thing they just added on afterwards, was it?
No, absolutely not. And that's a really vital detail they emphasize in the paper. The alignment model is jointly trained end-to-end with the rest of the translation network. Meaning the model learns how to align the source and target words at the same time as it's learning how to actually translate. The alignment strategy itself gets optimized based on what leads to better overall translations. It learns alignment and translation together.
Okay, so they had this really elegant idea, this attention mechanism. The next step, obviously, is proving it works better. How did they test this new model? They called it RNN search, right, against the old RNN deck.
Right. They used a standard large-scale data set for English to French translation. It was from the WMT 2014 shared task, a common benchmark. They trained versions of both models, the old RNN deck and their new RNN search.
Okay. And what did the results show? They used BLEU score, which is a common way to measure how close machine translations are to good human translations, right?
Yes, exactly. BLEU score compares the machine output to one or more human reference translations. And the quantitative results, the scores, were very clear. Their new RNN search model significantly outperformed the basic RNN deck across all their tests, higher BLEU scores. But the most important finding, the real clincher, was how the models handled sentence length.
The bottleneck problem we started with.
Exactly. The performance of the basic RNN deck model, just as expected, dropped off pretty dramatically as the sentences got longer.
It choked on long inputs.
Pretty much. But the RNN search model, especially a version they trained on sentences up to 50 words long, showed no significant deterioration in performance, even on sentences that were 50 words long or even longer.
Wow, that's it right there. That's the fix. It actually solved the length problem.
Absolutely. And to really hammer this point home, they found that even an RNN search model that was trained only on shorter sentences, up to 30 words, still managed to outperform the basic RNN deck model that had been trained on longer sentences, up to 50 words.
So it wasn't just about seeing more long sentences during training.
No.
It was fundamentally about the architecture being better suited for the task.
Correct. The attention mechanism made the crucial difference.
And how did it stack up against the the non-neural methods that were dominant back then.
That was another really interesting result. They noted that their RNN Search 50 model, the one trained on longer sentences, achieved performance that was comparable, pretty close to the state-of-the-art conventional system at the time. That was a phrase-based system called Moses.
Moses was the big one then.
It was. And this was on sentences where all the words were known, so no issues with unknown words muddying the comparison. This was a big deal because systems like Moses had been developed and tuned over many years, often using way more data, including lots of text in just one language. And here comes this relatively new single neural network approach, RNN search, basically matching it on this task. It was quite a statement.
What's really fascinating here, though, is that the paper lets you kind of peek inside the model's brain, doesn't it? They visualize those soft alignment weights, the attention scores we talked about. What do those pictures actually show?
Yeah, those visualizations are incredibly insightful. For English to French translation, where the word order is often pretty similar, you mostly see these nice diagonal patterns. They call it monotonic alignment.
Meaning it's mostly matching source word 1 to target word 1, source word 2 to target word 2, and so on.
Generally, yeah. It shows the model is paying attention to the source words roughly in the same order as it's generating the target words, which makes sense for languages like English and French.
But I bet it's not always that simple. Language isn't always perfectly aligned.
It's definitely not.
Yeah.
And this is where the power of having the model learn the alignment really shines. They show some great examples of non-monotonic alignments where the model has to jump around.
Like what?
Okay, so there's an example translating the English phrase European Economic Area into the French Zone Économique Européenne.
Okay, the order is different. Area comes last in English. Zone comes first in French.
Exactly. And the visualization clearly shows that when the model is generating the French word zone, it's putting most of its attention, its highest weight, on the English word area, way over at the end of the source phrase.
So it jumps ahead.
It jumps ahead. Then, when it goes to generate économique and European, its attention shifts back to the earlier English words economic and European. It learned the reordering needed for that specific phrase pair.
Wow. So it's not just linking words one-to-one, it's actually learning how phrases get restructured between the two languages.
Precisely. And it also helps with more subtle things, too. They give the example of translating the man into French, which is l'homme.
Right, the becomes le, attached to the noun.
Yeah. A rigid system might just try to map the directly to L, but the soft alignment visualization shows the model is actually paying attention to both the source word the and the source word man when it decides to generate L. It needs the context of man to know that the should become L and not say le or la.
So it uses the surrounding words to make better local decisions. It naturally handles these little differences in how languages package information.
Exactly. The soft distributed attention lets it gather context from multiple places.
Okay, these visualizations are cool. They show how it might be working. But the million-dollar question is, did this new approach actually fix the main problem? Did it translate long sentences correctly where the old one failed?
Absolutely. And the paper includes some really compelling qualitative examples, side-by-side comparisons that make this crystal clear.
Okay, give me one.
All right. They show a long source sentence, something about a doctor's admitting privilege at a hospital. The basic RNN-DEC model, the old one trained on sentences up to 50 words, it actually started translating okay. But then, probably because the sentence was just too long and its fixed vector got overloaded, it completely lost the plot towards the end. It started generating stuff that didn't match the source at all.
Like the gibberish failure we talked about right at the beginning.
Precisely that kind of failure. It took a phrase like, based on his status as a healthcare worker at a hospital, and translated it as something completely wrong, like based on his state of health. Just went off the rails.
And the new RNN search model with attention.
The RNN Search 50 model. It produced a full, accurate, grammatically correct translation of the entire long sentence. No problem.
That's pretty convincing.
Yeah, and they show another example, something about Disney's efforts on digital platforms. Again, a long sentence. The basic model started to deviate, made errors, even missed a closing quotation mark after about 30 words or so. Just couldn't handle the length. The RNN search model, again, translated the whole thing correctly.
So these examples, plus the BLEU scores showing robustness to length.
Right. Together, they provide really strong evidence for the paper's main hypothesis, that the attention mechanism, by getting rid of that fixed-length bottleneck, makes the RNN search model much, much more reliable, especially for long sentences.
Looking back now, with the benefit of hindsight, how significant was this paper in the bigger picture of neural machine translation?
Oh, it was hugely significant. As they mentioned in the paper itself, it represented a radical departure from how people were thinking about using neural networks for translation at the time.
Oh, so?
Well, before this, neural networks were often used just as smaller components within those larger traditional statistical machine translation systems. Like maybe a neural network would help score phrase pairs or re-rank the top translation candidates produced by the main system.
So they were helpers, not the main engine.
Exactly. This paper really showed the potential, maybe for the first time convincingly, for a single unified neural network trained end-to-end to handle the entire translation task pretty competently on its own.
They do mention that similar ideas about alignment existed in other fields, right?
Yes, they acknowledge similar concepts were used in areas like speech recognition or generating handwriting, but there's a key difference. Those applications often assumed the alignment would move pretty much strictly in one direction, through the sequences monotonically.
Which doesn't work for translation always.
Right, because word order often needs to change quite drastically between languages. Think English to Japanese, for example. That kind of strict one-direction assumption would be a major limitation. The beauty of their approach was that the model learned the alignment, including complex, non-monotonic jumps, directly from the translation data.
And looking forward from that paper, what challenges did they see remaining? What did they leave for future work?
Well, one key challenge they identified was improving how the model handled unknown or rare words, words it hadn't seen much or at all during training.
The out-of-vocabulary problem.
Exactly. Traditional systems, with their massive phrase tables and language models built from huge text corpora, were often still better at dealing with those rare words. So figuring out how to make these end-to-end neural models handle unknown words better was a necessary next step to fully match and eventually surpass the performance of the best conventional systems across the board.
Which, of course, is a problem the field has spent a lot of time tackling since then, with things like subword units and other techniques.
Indeed. Lots of progress there.
So, wrapping this up, what's the big takeaway here? What does this deep dive really show us?
I think it shows how a seemingly simple, intuitive idea, basically, training a neural network to dynamically focus its attention on the relevant parts of its input while it's generating its output, was actually a profound breakthrough.
Yeah, it wasn't just an incremental improvement.
No, not at all. By overcoming that fundamental limitation, the fixed-length vector bottleneck, the RNN search architecture they proposed fundamentally upgraded the capability of neural machine translation. It made it reliable for the kind of complex, long sentences that are everywhere in real language, the very sentences that tripped up earlier models so badly.
It really highlights how powerful a new architectural idea can be in AI. And the fact that this relatively new end-to-end neural approach could achieve performance comparable to those highly tuned, mature, phrase-based systems back then, that was a major statement.
It really was. This paper and its clear demonstration of the power of attention specifically in sequence-to-sequence tasks like translation truly laid essential groundwork. So much of the incredible language AI we see and interact with today builds on this core concept.
It proved that dynamic focus is just critical for processing sequences effectively.
Absolutely.
Okay, so here's a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. If learning to dynamically pay attention to different parts of a source sequence was so crucial for translating it into a target sequence, where else could this idea work? Think about other tasks that involve turning one sequence of information into another, maybe summarizing really long documents, or generating complex computer code from natural language instructions, or even something like predicting protein structures from amino acid sequences.
Interesting areas.
What kind of hidden connections, what complex patterns might this attention mechanism help AI uncover if we apply it in those domains? What could it reveal about how different parts of an input sequence relate to different parts of the desired output? Something to think about.